during the famous 1997 to 1998 season, the year they made their final title run. According to historical sports media salary archives, Pippen was the sixth highest-paid player on the Chicago Bulls. But it gets worse. In the entire league, he ranked 122nd, earning roughly $2.7 million. Television coverage at the time focused heavily on the glaring disrespect of those numbers. Reporters noted how surreal it was to watch a global icon step onto the hardwood, making less than role players on struggling teams. Why did management let that tension boil over so publicly? How does an organization look a man in the eye, ask him to guard the toughest matchups every single night, and then hand him a check that barely reflects a fraction of his worth? It created a bitter divide that poisoned the locker room long before the dynasty officially broke apart. It was a staggering contradiction. Just a couple of years earlier, in 1996, he had been honored as one of the 50 greatest players in NBA history, according to official league records. He had gold medals, multiple championship rings, and universal respect from his peers. Everyone on the floor knew exactly who he was. But to understand why a top 50 legend let himself get locked into a deal that paid him like a backup, you have to look past the bright lights of Chicago and head down to a small town in Arkansas, where a terrified kid was just trying to survive. Hamburg, Arkansas was not exactly a pipeline to the pros. It was a quiet, working-class mill town where real life had a habit of hitting hard and early. For the Pippen family, survival was the daily goal. The household was crowded, money was tight, and tragedy altered the course of their lives permanently. His father suffered a severe stroke that left him paralyzed and restricted to a wheelchair. Not long after, one of Scottie's older brothers was involved in an accident that also left him paralyzed. For a young man coming up in that house, the pressure to provide was immense and unspoken. There was no safety net. Basketball was an outlet, but it hardly looked like a career path. When he arrived on the campus of the University of Central Arkansas in the fall of 1983, he was not highly recruited. According to University Athletic Archives, he entered the school on a basic academic grant. He was barely 6 feet, 1 inch tall, and he kept his spot on the team by essentially working as the student equipment manager. He swept the floors, picked up the laundry, and handed out towels to the scholarship players. Reporters looking back at those early days noted at the time that absolutely nobody saw NBA greatness in the quiet, skinny kid folding uniforms. But then, the story took a wild turn. How does a literal towel boy suddenly become the most terrifying prospect in the country? Over the next couple of years, nature took over. He experienced a freak physical growth spurt, shooting up to 6 feet, 8 inches. Yet, because he had spent his formative years playing like a guard, he kept his ball-handling skills, his court vision, and his quickness. He was suddenly a forward trapped in a point guard skill set, dominating his conference and turning the heads of professional scouts. By his senior year, the secret of the Arkansas walk-on was completely out. The hard work, the late nights in an empty gym, and the physical transformation had finally paid off. On June 22, 1987, his life changed forever. He was selected 5th overall in the draft by the Seattle Supersonics before being immediately traded to the Chicago Bulls, according to NBA draft records. Pippen had finally secured a guaranteed paycheck and the ability to take care of his struggling family, but the physical punishment waiting for him in the Eastern Conference would test exactly how much he was willing to endure. Stepping into the late 1980s NBA meant stepping into a physical war zone, and the Eastern Conference was the absolute roughest neighborhood in the league. When Pippen arrived in Chicago, he found himself under the intense, unforgiving wing of Michael Jordan, a leader who demanded perfection and had very little patience for rookies making mistakes. The Bulls were a rising force, but there was a massive, bruising obstacle standing directly in their path: the Detroit Pistons. The bad boys of Detroit practically built a physical wall to stop Chicago. They knew they could beat up Jordan, but they also figured out quickly that they needed to attack Scottie's psyche. They aimed to break the Bulls' system by intimidating the young forward. For a while, the strategy worked. Pippen was learning the ropes, taking hard fouls, and trying to figure out how to match the sheer violence of playoff basketball. The tension reached a defining breaking point in the spring of 1990. The Bulls had fought their way through a brutal series to force a winner-take-all game against Detroit. According to official game box scores from June 3, 1990, Pippen shot a dismal 1 for 10 from the field, scoring only 2 points in Game 7 of the Eastern Conference Finals. The collapse was shocking, but the explanation behind it became one of the most heavily debated moments of his career. According to his own account in post-game interviews and his later memoirs, Pippen suffered a severe migraine just before tip-off. It was a headache so blinding and intense that it completely ruined his vision. He told the staff he literally could not see the rim clearly enough to shoot. Major sports media reports at the time were utterly ruthless. Reporters noted the convenient timing of the illness and immediately questioned his heart on national television. Was it truly a random medical crisis, or had the immense pressure of the Detroit defense finally made him crack? Some sources argued he simply wilted when the lights were brightest, while others fiercely disputed it, pointing to the paralyzing reality of severe migraines. The label of being soft started to stick, creating a damaging narrative that tormented him in private. The media called him fragile, and the fans wondered if he had what it took to be a champion. But the Chicago front office looked at the fallout and saw an insecure, vulnerable young star who was now in the perfect frame of mind to sign the most disastrous, team-friendly contract in the history of the sport. The label of being fragile hung over his head, and the Chicago front office knew exactly how to use that insecurity to their advantage. General manager Jerry Krause was building a dynasty, and to do that, he needed elite talent at a deep discount. He looked at Scottie Pippen and saw a young man carrying the financial weight of his entire family. A man terrified of suffering a career-ending injury with nothing to fall back on. Pippen's father and brother were already in wheelchairs, and the fear of his own body giving out drove him to seek immediate ironclad security over long-term value. In 1991, he put his signature on a 7-year contract extension worth exactly $18 million, according to public NBA contract databases. At the time, $18 million sounded like generational wealth to a kid from rural Arkansas. But the length of the deal was a fatal flaw. Basketball archives show that even the team's owner explicitly warned Pippen not to sign a deal that long, knowing how the league's television revenues were structured. Why did a rising star ignore the owner's advice and lock himself in a financial cage? He simply could not afford to gamble on his own health. He took the guaranteed money, breathed a sigh of relief, and went back to work. But the peace of mind did not last. By 1995, the landscape of the sport had completely transformed. The league had secured massive new television rights, and according to league financial reports, the NBA salary cap had more than doubled. Suddenly, average starters and unproven rookies were signing contracts that dwarfed the salary of the best small forward in the world. Krause stubbornly refused to renegotiate, citing the sanctity of the signed agreement. The relationship between the front office and their star forward turned instantly toxic, fueled by a simmering daily resentment. Bound by a piece of paper he could not legally escape, Pippen swallowed his anger and channeled his frustration into becoming the most terrifying defensive weapon in the history of basketball. When you strip away the contract disputes and the front office drama, you are left with the pure, undeniable genius of Scottie Pippen on a basketball court. As the Bulls transformed from playoff contenders into perennial champions, it was Pippen's evolution that pushed them over the edge. He was not just scoring or rebounding, He was actively dismantling the opposing team's offensive strategies in real time. The defining moment of this basketball maturity happened during the 1991 NBA Finals against the Los Angeles Lakers. The Bulls had dropped the first game, and Magic Johnson was controlling the tempo effortlessly. On June 5, 1991, for Game 2, the coaching staff made a massive adjustment. According to sports media analysis from the era, Pippen took over the primary defensive assignment on Magic Johnson, picking him up full court and disrupting his rhythm, holding the legendary point guard to a series-changing shooting percentage. Television broadcasts at the time focused heavily on how this single defensive switch completely suffocated the Lakers' offense, turning the series entirely in Chicago's favor. But what happens to a player's mindset when he realizes he is just as good, if not better, than the titans of the game getting all the credit? His confidence exploded. By the summer of 1992, he was no longer just a vital piece of the Chicago puzzle. He was basketball royalty. According to Olympic historical archives, he started alongside Michael Jordan on the legendary Dream Team, winning a gold medal in Barcelona and showcasing his versatile, suffocating play style to the entire world. He stood shoulder to shoulder with Larry Bird, Magic Johnson, and Charles Barkley, proving to himself and the public that he was an absolute peer among giants. He had proven he was a champion on the global stage, but just as he reached his prime, Michael Jordan shockingly walked away from the game, leaving Pippen holding the keys to a kingdom that was not quite his. With Jordan suddenly swinging a baseball bat in the minor leagues, the 1993 to 1994 season belonged entirely to Scottie Pippen. For years, critics had whispered that his success was merely a byproduct of playing next to the greatest player of all time. This was his moment to silence everyone, and the numbers he produced were staggering. He took control of the team completely. According to official basketball archives, he averaged 22 points, 8.7 rebounds, and 5.6 assists that season, leading the Bulls in almost every single statistical category. He finished third in the most valuable player voting, guiding a depleted Chicago roster to 55 wins. He was finally the guy commanding the spotlight and proving his greatness as a solo act. But the pressure of absolute leadership is heavy, and it cracked him in the worst possible moment. The Bulls were in a brutal playoff series against their bitter rivals, the New York Knicks. On May 13th, 1994, Game 3 was tied and Chicago had possession with exactly 1.8 seconds left on the clock. Coach Phil Jackson drew up the final play, but he did not design it for Pippen. He called the number of a rookie, Tony Kukoc. According to television broadcast footage and coach memoirs from the era, Pippen was so insulted by the decision that he simply refused to leave the bench. He sat down, crossed his arms, and let his team take the floor without him. Kukoc miraculously hit the game-winning shot, but the victory was entirely overshadowed by the mutiny. Major sports media reports the next morning were merciless. How does a trusted leader look his squad in the eye after abandoning them in the final seconds of a playoff battle? Coach memoirs later revealed a heartbreaking locker room scene immediately after the game, with veteran center Bill Cartwright in tears, addressing the team and demanding accountability. The betrayal fractured the trust of the organization. It almost got him shipped out of Chicago permanently, and a massive trade was practically finalized before a two-word fax changed basketball history. The fallout from the playoff mutiny was severe. The trust between the star forward and the coaching staff was fractured, and the Chicago front office was quietly exploring their options. Pippen was at the absolute peak of his abilities, but his relationship with management had soured so deeply that a permanent separation felt inevitable. During the 1994 NBA draft, a massive blockbuster deal was placed squarely on the table. According to major sports media reports and front office interviews from the era, Pippen was aggressively shopped to the Seattle Supersonics in a trade that would have brought Shawn Kemp and Ricky Pierce to Chicago. The deal was heavily negotiated and nearly finalized before being vetoed at the absolute last minute. Pippen stayed, but the psychological damage was done. He knew his bags were practically packed, and he played out the first half of the 1994 to 1995 season as a man burdened by an overwhelming sense of resentment. That month, the press was writing constantly about his visible frustration. Reporters noted at the time that Pippen seemed disconnected on the floor, exhausted by carrying a depleted roster while answering daily questions about his future in a city that had nearly shipped him out. The team was struggling to maintain their dominance, and the tension in the building was thick enough to cut. Just as the breaking point seemed imminent, the entire landscape of the sport flipped on its axis. On March 18, 1995, Michael Jordan released a famous two-word fax stating simply, "I am back," according to press releases from the time. The solo reign of Scottie Pippen was over in an instant. The power dynamic immediately reverted to the old status quo, with Jordan reclaiming the spotlight and Pippen seamlessly stepping back into his role as the ultimate facilitator. Reunited, they were about to build the greatest team ever assembled, but Pippen's body was slowly breaking down under the physical toll of an entire career spent doing the dirty work. The return of Jordan restored the natural order of the Chicago Bulls, but the version of Scottie Pippen that stepped into the second three-peat was fundamentally different from the young athlete who conquered the early 90s. He was no longer the hyper-athletic forward who could outrun every single player in the building. Years of brutal playoff series, relentless defensive assignments, and deep tournament runs had taken a massive toll on his physical frame. His back was perpetually stiff, his feet ached constantly, and the sheer mileage on his legs was becoming a serious, undeniable issue. Yet, his basketball intelligence allowed him to adapt perfectly. He learned how to dominate games with his mind when his body refused to cooperate. During the historic 1995 to 1996 season, the Bulls achieved a then-record 72 wins. According to league standings and official player statistics, Pippen fought through the pain to play 77 out of 82 regular season games. He anchored the absolute best defense in the league while barely being able to walk without severe discomfort on most mornings. Television coverage at the time focused heavily on this transformation. Analysts praised his evolution from a pure high-flying athlete into a tactical defensive genius who could anticipate the opponent's offensive schemes 2 steps before they actually happened. But the physical cost of that brilliance was terrifying to watch up close. Look at the iconic game on June 11, 1997, widely remembered in basketball history as the flu game. While Jordan was visibly sick and practically collapsing on the floor, Pippen was the silent structure holding the team together. According to official game logs, Pippen played 45 grueling minutes that night. He locked down the perimeter, kept the offense moving, and physically carried his exhausted teammate off the court when the final buzzer finally sounded. He was quite literally holding the dynasty up on his own failing joints. The rings kept coming, but as the 1997 season ended, Pippen made a calculated, spiteful medical decision that would infuriate the front office and paralyze the start of their final run. By the time the Bulls were preparing for what would become their final championship season, the relationship between Scottie Pippen and general manager Jerry Krause had deteriorated into open, bitter warfare. Pippen was completely exhausted, severely underpaid, and deeply resentful of management's constant public threats to dismantle the aging roster. He also had a ruptured tendon in his left foot that desperately requires surgery, an injury he had been managing quietly for months. Instead of getting the procedure done during the summer so he could be fully healed for training camp, he deliberately waited. According to medical updates in sports media, Pippen finally underwent surgery in October 1997, a timeline that guaranteed he would miss the first 35 games of the regular season. In interviews and later documentaries, he made his reasoning perfectly clear. He was not going to ruin his own summer rehabilitation time for an organization that refused to pay him his actual market value. The press instantly caught wind of the hostile standoff. Reporters noted at the time that the delay was a direct targeted strike against Jerry Krause, a way for Pippen to leverage his absence and force management to feel his true value to the team. The tension exploded publicly shortly after the season began. In November 1997, while still recovering and sitting on the bench in street clothes, Pippen loudly and officially demanded a trade from the Chicago Bulls, according to a televised locker room press conference transcript. He was actively daring the front office to pull the trigger. The stories leaking out of the locker room were staggering. By some accounts, he openly hurled insults at the general manager on the team bus and vowed never to play for the franchise again. Yet, the front office held firm, refusing to deal him. Pippen eventually swallowed his pride, returned to the court, and helped secure his sixth and final ring with a heroic postseason effort. With the championship secured and the dynasty officially dismantled in the aftermath, it was time for Scottie Pippen to finally get paid, even if it meant signing a massive new contract to wear a completely wrong jersey in the state of Texas. Leaving the Chicago Bulls meant leaving behind a dynasty, but it also meant that Scottie Pippen could finally step into the open market and command the financial respect he had been denied for an entire decade. The league was coming off a tense labor dispute, and when the dust settled, Pippen finally got his payday. According to public league transaction records, in January 1999, he was acquired by the Houston Rockets and signed to a massive 5-year contract worth $67.2 million. For the first time in his professional life, his paycheck actually matched his resume. The move was heavily hyped as the creation of a veteran superteam. Pippen was joining forces with Hakeem Olajuwon and Charles Barkley, forming a trio of absolute legends who were supposed to dominate the Western Conference. Reporters noted at the time that Houston was immediately viewed as a legitimate championship threat, a team stacked with Hall of Fame talent perfectly positioned for a deep playoff run. But the reality of throwing aging stars together rarely matches the fantasy drawn up on a whiteboard. The Houston experiment was a disaster almost from the opening tip. The roster lacked chemistry, the offense felt painfully slow, and the clashing personalities in the locker room quickly turned toxic. Pippen, who had spent his entire career operating in a highly disciplined, intensely demanding system under Phil Jackson and Michael Jordan, suddenly found himself surrounded by an entirely different culture. He grew visibly frustrated with the team's conditioning, and his anger zeroed in directly on Charles Barkley. According to press conference transcripts and public television interviews given by Pippen that year, he openly criticized Barkley's dedication, questioning his work ethic and his desire to win a championship. The tension between the two superstars fractured the team beyond repair. Two icons who had shared the global stage on the Dream Team were suddenly throwing bitter insults at each other through the press. How did two all-time greats turn on each other so aggressively in a matter of months? For Pippen, it came down to an absolute lack of patience for anything less than championship focus. He realized the situation in Texas was unsalvageable, and he demanded out. According to NBA trade archives, in October 1999, Pippen was traded away from Houston after playing exactly one 50-game season. Escaping Texas, he packed his bags and headed up to the Pacific Northwest, looking for one last real chance at a ring as the veteran leader of a fiercely talented roster famously known as the Jail Blazers. Landing in Portland gave Scottie Pippen exactly what he needed. A deep, incredibly talented team that just needed a quiet, commanding leader to pull them all together. The Trail Blazers were loaded with dynamic scorers and fierce defenders, but they were also a volatile, emotional group that frequently struggled to maintain their composure. Pippen stepped into the locker room not as the primary scoring option, but as the stabilizing veteran anchor. His impact was immediate and undeniable. The physical pain in his feet and back was still there, but his basketball intelligence elevated the entire roster. According to official league standings for the 1999-2000 season, Pippen helped lead the Blazers to 59 wins, securing the second-best record in the entire NBA. Television coverage at the time focused heavily on his transformation into an older, wiser floor general. Analysts marveled at how he controlled the tempo of games without having to score 25 points, quietly organizing the defense and putting players like Rasheed Wallace and Arvydas Sabonis into perfect positions to succeed. Portland looked like an absolute powerhouse, and they marched right into the Western Conference Finals to face the Los Angeles Lakers, led by the terrifying duo of Shaquille O'Neal and Kobe Bryant. The series was an absolute war, stretching to a winner-take-all Game 7 in Los Angeles. For 3 quarters, the Blazers executed a brilliant game plan, completely frustrating the Lakers and building a massive lead. But then, the momentum shifted in an incredibly painful way. According to historical game logs from June 4, 2000, the Trail Blazers suffered a catastrophic collapse, blowing a 15-point fourth-quarter lead and allowing the Lakers to advance to the finals. The loss was devastating. Pippen had been agonizingly close to proving he could guide a team to a championship entirely on his own, without the shadow of his former legendary teammate hanging over him. The window for a 7th ring slammed permanently shut that night in Los Angeles. He spent 3 more years in Portland providing veteran minutes, but his body was rapidly failing him. And as his active playing days slowly wound down quiet, disturbing rumors began to circulate in the press about where all that hard-earned $67 million contract money was actually going. The final days of a legendary career are rarely glamorous. After his run in Portland concluded, Pippen made a brief, highly sentimental return to the franchise where he built his legacy. According to major sports media reports, on July 20, 2003, he signed a 2-year, $10 million contract to finish his playing days with the Chicago Bulls. But the reunion was purely ceremonial. His body simply could not handle the rigors of an NBA schedule anymore. Lingering injuries severely limited his availability, and he managed to play in only 23 games that season. Realizing the physical toll was finally too much to overcome, he stepped away. In 2004, according to a press conference transcript, Scottie Pippen officially announced his retirement from professional basketball. He left the court as a 6-time champion, a surefire Hall of Famer, and a global icon. Yet, the transition into retirement was anything but peaceful. While the public celebrated his on-court achievements, a very different story was unfolding in the background. A man who had fought so bitterly to secure his financial future during the 90s suddenly found himself wrapped in massive legal battles over his own wealth. Court records showed a tangled web of bad investments and severe financial mismanagement. Reporters noted at the time that the situation was incredibly complicated. According to public court filings, Pippen launched a multi-million-dollar civil lawsuit against his former financial advisors, alleging gross negligence. One of the most glaring disputes involved the disastrous purchase of a private jet that reportedly could not even fly, an investment that drained a massive amount of capital. By some accounts, his trusting nature off the court had been thoroughly exploited, forcing a man who had finally earned his word to spend his early retirement fighting in courtrooms just to get it back. He eventually stabilized his life and reclaimed his footing, stepping into the quiet role of a respected basketball elder statesman. For a long time, the drama seemed permanently left in the past, but 2 decades later, a massive television documentary would unexpectedly reopen every single old wound, pushing Scottie Pippen to publicly declare open season on his former best friend. For a long time, Scottie Pippen seemed perfectly content playing the role of the quiet, respected elder statesman of basketball. The messy contract disputes and the locker room friction were largely viewed as ancient history. But that hard-earned peace was completely shattered by a massive television event that brought the most painful moments of his career right back to the surface. In April 2020, with the entire sports world shut down, a 10-part documentary called The Last Dance premiered to a captive global audience. According to television viewership reports, the series was an absolute juggernaut, drawing over 5 million viewers per episode. It was meant to be a definitive celebration of the Chicago Bulls dynasty, but the focus was heavily skewed. Reporters covering the release noted at the time how the series deliberately magnified Pippen's lowest moments, reigniting fierce public debates over his notoriously bad contract, the migraine in Detroit, and his infamous refusal to enter the game in 1994. The documentary was universally praised, but inside Pippen's camp, the reaction was pure fury. He felt the project, which heavily featured Michael Jordan's perspective and editorial control, intentionally framed him as a flawed, occasionally selfish subordinate rather than an equal architect of the championships. The deep, lingering wounds of disrespect that had plagued his time in Chicago were suddenly ripped open and put on display for a brand new generation of fans. Why would his former teammate allow him to be portrayed that way? For Pippen, it was the ultimate betrayal of trust. He refused to let that narrative stand as the final word. On November 9, 2021, Pippen fired back by releasing his own memoir titled Unguarded. In his published memoir, the tone was startlingly direct. By his own account, the respect he once publicly held for Jordan's leadership was entirely gone, replaced by pointed criticism of how the documentary was manipulated to glorify one man at the expense of the team. He took aggressive aim at his former best friend, a move that altered his own public image almost overnight from a silent legend into a deeply bitter critic. The immediate blowback was intense. As some sports media outlets claimed, his attacks were driven by lingering jealousy over the documentary's massive